Good evening and welcome to Athens City Council. It's Monday, April 26th, 2021 at 7 p.m. And tonight we are in a series of committee meetings. And before we begin those, we would like to welcome Mr. Ben Ziff, who's been appointed by the Athens Democratic Party to fill the unexpired term of at-large council member Peter Katsas. So welcome to Mr. Ziff, and he has agreed to serve on the Transportation Committee. Our meeting tonight will start off with City and Safety Services Committee, and this is chaired by Council Member Grace and joined by Council Members Fall and Clodfelter.
Thank you, President Nisley. This evening, our committee meeting starts off with an opportunity to learn about Clean Fuels Ohio and a fleet electrification analysis for the city. And I'm going to hand it over to Mayor Patterson to do the starting introductions on this.
Thank you, Councilmember Grace. Yeah, I know this is a wonderful opportunity for council to hear from Power Clean Fuels Ohio. We have been a recognized city in the state of Ohio for quite some time. If I'm not mistaken, we were one of the first cities in the first tranche of cities that were recognized in our efforts to reduce our carbon footprint as a community. And this includes everything from the solar fee that the citizens voted by 76% to have put on the ballot, the carbon fee rather, as well as our installation of solar on municipal structures, most notably the water treatment plant, and also clearing the path for our residents to be able to put solar on their homes as well. And then with today's discussion from Andrew and Brandon is that we've been pretty successful and continue to be so, and I would like to continue down the path of expanding our EV or electric vehicle fleet, where the code office, as you're well aware, has 3 Nissan Leafs. The Arts, Parks and Recreation had an EV, and we'll get one. We'll have a replacement EV. But I think it's great that you're going to be able to hear of what the city could and should be looking at with our overall fleet. And I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Chicky.
Hi, good evening, committee and members of council. Thank you, Mayor Patterson. I'm going to introduce, introduction, Brandon Jones and Andrew Conley, and they're representing Clean Fuels Ohio and Power a Clean Future Ohio. They have a short presentation. I promise that we'll keep it to about 15 minutes. I was going to say, under 2 hours, but it's been a long day, and we'll try to get through this and share some of the initial findings with the data that we provided for Clean Fuels Ohio. And our hope is once we get these data points and we work through some more details and we stand up a new committee related to how we want to proceed. Once we get the full report, we'll have an opportunity to go looking for some one-to-one replacements. And that's really the idea, is that we want it to be both economical and environmental in nature. So we don't want to break the budget while pushing this forward, but also we want to be good stewards of taxpayer money. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brandon Jones and Andrew Conley, and they'll have a brief presentation for you all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm Andrew Conley, and appreciate Councilmember Grace and Mayor Patterson and the rest of council for having us today. As Mr. Chicky said, we're going to do a brief presentation about who we are, how this fits into Power Clean Future Ohio, and where we're going with the city. Our goal is to not do this in a vacuum and to work in partnership with you all and core stakeholders, both within the operations of the city, as well as with council and the community, to make any recommendations we make take place in coordination and not in a vacuum. So Brandon Jones is on our staff. He's joining me. We're going to tag team this, and I believe Brandon's going to share his screen so we can just show as well as tell a little bit today in the time we have. Great. So obviously we are doing a fleet electrification analysis. And so if we just jump forward here, we want to briefly introduce ourselves as Clean Fuels Ohio and say a couple more words about Power Clean Future Ohio. So Clean Fuels Ohio, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We're headquartered in Columbus, but serving the entire state. Our goal here, as it says, is to make Ohio a cleaner and more prosperous state. We do that by a range of activities, but suffice for this conversation to know that we're fuel and technology inclusive. We're not here to represent one alternative fuel or technology type over others, although as I'll get into it, you'll hear that for Power Clean Future Ohio, they've asked us to focus on EVs. So we work with lots of fleets across all the commercially available fuels and technology platforms, but for the purposes of today's conversation, we'll be focusing on electric vehicles, which brings us to the next slide here. So many of you, and as Mayor Patterson said, have heard about Power Clean Future Ohio. It's really an initiative focused on local communities leading the way in carbon reduction and climate goals. And as Mayor Patterson said, Athens was one of the first leading communities, and really these you can see all the communities right now, they're 12 right now who have joined, focusing on multiple areas, transportation just being one of those areas. But we are a resource, free resource for any city or leading community that's focusing on transportation. So if we jump to the next slide, we are here to provide a free EV assessment for the fleet itself. And so what we want to do is just ground council members on a little bit of context of why EVs matter and why it's pressing for communities to look at this right now. So the main reason is that we're seeing a huge growth in the electric vehicle market, driven by a number of factors, these four being the biggest ones. So companies like GM are making investments here in the state of Ohio, in the Mahoning Valley, in their battery manufacturing, as well as vehicle manufacturing. We're seeing policy both at the federal, state, and local levels that are driving this. We're really seeing the technology drive this in, just in ways we saw computer technology go from rooms to desktops to the palm of our hand. We're seeing that same kind of rapid evolution of electric vehicles. And then by far, the economics is what's really spurring the market. And just to mention one fact there, jumping to the next slide, over the past decade, we've seen an 87% drop in the cost of lithium-ion batteries. And what this really means is that most analysts are projecting that EVs will get to price parity with conventional vehicles within this decade. And so when that happens, jump into the next slide, analysts are really projecting a significant uptake in new vehicle purchase being electric. So by, today we sit here with 2.7% of new vehicle sales as EVs, but by the end of the decade, as these factors come into play, analysts are projecting that somewhere between a quarter and a third of new vehicle sales will be EVs. And so now is the time to really get out in front of this, to plan for that adoption curve for a fleet, as well as communities plan for their resident motorists to be adopting those technologies. So that's what we're here to focus on. And Brandon Jones on our team is really leading that effort. So I'm going to turn it over to him to round us out with some data from the city.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, council members and Mayor Patterson. So with the remainder of the presentation, we'd like to just give you all a snapshot of what our process for the analysis for electrification of the city's fleet looks like, where we're at to date with that process, and where we're going to next. So this gives you just a breakdown of the steps we follow in our analysis of electrification for fleets, and shows you where we are at right now. So these first two steps that we've completed is gathering and assessing data on the city's fleet inventory, as well as its fuel usage and mileage data, and using that data to establish some key performance indicators and goals for the city in terms of electrification that meet the city's needs and budget. So I'll go over what we've done in those two steps to date and give a little bit of a preview of these next few steps that we'll be moving on to next. So there were two types of data that we were really looking at for the fleet. One was inventory data, consists of things like make, model year, mileage for the vehicles. And we had inventory data on 111 vehicles with the City of Athens fleet. And then the second type is fuel usage data, which includes both fuel use and cost. And we determined that we had 86 fleet vehicles in total that had complete inventory and fuel use data. Now, beyond that, we used a couple of assumptions to narrow down our focus among these fleet vehicles a little bit further, which brought us to what you can see here as 53 vehicles out of the fleet that we really wanted to hone in on for electrification. The chart on the right here shows you the breakdown of those 53 vehicles by city department. And the two assumptions that we used to arrive at that number of vehicles was we really focused on vehicles that were purchased new. This just helped give us confidence in the operations and mileage of those vehicles. And we also focused on class size vehicles that ranged from light duty sedans to half-ton pickups. And that's just based on market availability of various models and what we think is going to make sense. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation, as we will offer some recommendations for down the road considerations regarding heavier duty vehicles. So just wanted to give one quick example here of the types of insights and conclusions we can draw just at this stage of the analysis from the key performance indicators that we've come up with. So on this next slide here, we see on the left is the vehicles by department again, this time represented in percentages. And on the right is the fuel use by department, also represented in percentages. And this just shows us something that maybe on the one hand, we could guess at, that the police department has the larger share of vehicles, but also the larger share of fuel use. But perhaps one thing we may not have guessed at is that the portion of the police fuel use is larger than its portion of the vehicles in the fleet. And that's not to say that that's an issue or anything, but that's just one of the kind of insights that maybe we wouldn't be able to guess at until we dug deeper into the data, and that can help ground us moving forward in our analysis and recommendations. So again, these are just two of those key performance indicators that we're looking at. This table here represents the range of key performance indicators regarding mileage and fuel use and cost. I won't go into all of them, but we're just highlighting here the two that were represented on the previous screen, just to give you a sense of the range of indicators that we're looking at and comparing. And we have established these key performance indicators for the fleet as a whole, broken down by department, as you can see in this chart, but we've also done it for each department, broken down by vehicle even further as well. So if that gives you a scope of that initial analysis. Now, I want to give you, so that's what we've done to date, and we want to do a little bit of a preview of where we're going as well. And just to preface it, the examples that I'll be showing on these next slides, the charts and figures, these are examples from previous analyses that we've done. So the data represented on these slides is not referring to the City of Athens fleet as the previous data was. So just to clear up that. So The next step is going to be where we are actually looking at what available options are there for electric vehicles that match the model and class of vehicles that Athens has in its fleet. And what we're looking for in assessing what these one-to-one replacements would be is which of these electric vehicles are going to make sense based on the operations, the drive and duty cycle of the Athens fleet vehicles, and what's also going to make sense in terms of cost. So we won't be making any recommendations for vehicle replacements that don't meet those criteria based on the data that we've established and the needs that we've gotten from the key performance indicators. Now, one of the key things we'll be looking at in determining which replacements would make sense is total cost of ownership over the life cycle of the vehicle. That's going to be key. Which replacements are going to bring savings over the total lifespan. And one thing to consider there too is that there are certain models of electric vehicles that are eligible for federal tax credits. One example here is the Nissan Leaf. So that's something that is going to factor into that as well. Now, want to give a preview of two other areas of planning and recommendations that we'll be offering in our report as well. The first is returning to those heavier duty vehicles that we excluded at the beginning and getting down to that number of vehicles of 53. While we won't be offering one-to-one replacements for heavier duty vehicles, and that's mostly because they are not appearing as cost-effective options right now based on the high upfront capital cost, what we will be doing is saying, okay, based on the operations and cost of the current heavy duty vehicles in the fleet, what would the City of Athens need to look for in the heavier duty EV market to know that it might start to make sense? So what are the key criteria to look at to say, heavy duty vehicles for EVs, that still doesn't make sense versus when are you going to know that it is going to start to make sense? So that's something we're going to offer. And additionally, we will offer some planning recommendations for charging station installation based on the needs of the fleet, depending on how many electric vehicles will be there and additions will be made. What are the needs for charging stations and what would be the costs not only for installation, but also for maintenance and operation of those stations. So just to recap here, the next step that will be taking here after we've done the data gathering and key performance indicator analysis for the fleet to establish the baselines and goals. We will be evaluating the one replacement options for the vehicles that we are focusing on in the analysis and develop some recommendations based on that analysis. And we will be presenting some draft results from that to solicit feedback from key city stakeholders and working groups that Andrew will convene. And after receiving feedback on those initial results, we will make our revisions and present our final results in three-part form. We will have an Excel report that we'll be presenting, a written out executive summary, as well as any number of presentations to as many number of groups of stakeholders as makes sense. So I will conclude there and leave you with our contact information of our team here, Andrew and myself, as well as our project coordinator, Hallie Newhouse. We're happy to take any questions and conversations from there.
Thank you so much for being here. Does anyone on the committee have questions for our guest?
First, I would just like to thank you for doing this. I think it's rather remarkable that you provide this kind of analysis to communities for free. I don't quite know what your business model is, but that's just really generous of you. You said one thing that I'm not sure that I completely understood. In your analysis of the fleet and the fact that you identified 53 cars, did you say those were all new cars? Or would we be getting rid of the older cars and replacing them with electric cars?
Those are all vehicles that were purchased new. So they may be vehicles you've had for a decade, but they, at the time that they were acquired, they were new, meaning, they had a mileage of 0.
Okay.
It basically just helped us assess the annual mileage, because we could say you started at 0 and your final mileage is this, and we can average that out.
Great. Thank you for clarifying.
Member Crowell.
Thank you, Member Grace, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Looking at the report, it looks like the City of Athens averages about 10 miles per gallon for our vehicles. Is that sort of what you see? Is that pretty, to me, that seemed very low, but then I started thinking about all the different types of vehicles and how it brings down, but nothing on there is terribly high. Is that pretty typical for what you see?
Yes is the short answer. 2 quick things there. There's a lot of what fleets call productive idling of fleet vehicles. So like police cruisers need to be essentially keyed on to have all their comms, lights, and emergency equipment. More specialty pieces of equipment that are actually doing street maintenance and repair and other types of specialty services are keyed on. So you see that take down the overall average. And some fleets that have telematics devices, you can really get into that and actually chart out what's productive idling versus someone just sat there for an hour, ate their sandwich in the car in the air conditioning. So there is some non-productive idling, but you do see that average pretty low for most municipalities because it's low speed, city driving, plus all this productive idling.
Okay, appreciate it.
Member Fall.
Thank you. I want to mention that we do have a Clean Fleets committee that Jeff Reisner chairs, so there needs to be some kind of communication with that. And I'd like to say this fits right into the climate crisis emergency declaration that we did last year and other things that are going to be going forward for this year with establishing goals and objectives for the city to become net neutral and carbon free as soon as possible. So thank you very much.
President Nisley and then Mayor Patterson.
A question on the timeline when your analysis and recommendations might be available.
Yeah, we'll be able to work pretty quickly from here, but our goal is then to vet everything through the relevant committees to make sure it's in line with budgets and operational realities, that we're not doing it in a vacuum. So we should be able to turn around a draft analysis in the next couple weeks and have that begin to be vetted through stakeholder committees towards the latter half of May, and then really be at the discretion of your teams in terms of how many requested revisions and kind of further presentations.
Thank you.
Just quickly before going to Mayor Patterson, if you don't mind, there was a slide where you looked at the listed the dates for which you collected this mileage usage for city fleet vehicles. And was that mainly focusing within the past year?
Go ahead, Brandon.
I was just going to say I can try and pull that up again if.
But I believe it was like the last 3 years. We had significant data on 2020, but then we also had some additional data on 19 and 18, I believe is the shortest answer.
Okay. I was wondering, I know some of the vehicles in that list probably had significant change in usage during 2020.
Yeah.
The one I'm most familiar with is the municipal court vehicle. They use that for taking people to do community service work, which then during the pandemic completely changed how that happened. So I'm sure that vehicle was hardly used in 2020 as opposed to other years. So I just wondered how that's taken into account for planning. And Andrew Chicky, did you have a?
Yeah, I was going to add that when we were doing this analysis, I don't want to, I'll reserve time for Brandon because I know he's got a much deeper response to this, but that what we saw for 2020 compared to 2019 and 2018 was kind of a wash. That there were some departments and vehicles that we saw a much lower usage, but we also saw some departments and vehicles with a much higher usage because we pivoted on how many people were allowed in a vehicle at one time. So where we were taking one vehicle with 2 or 3 people to a job site, we now have 2 or 3 vehicles with one person each going to a job site, and that we noticed a higher usage in with those ones. And then I'll pass it over to Brandon.
Yeah, no, that mostly covers it. That it's we looked at compared the 2020 to 2018 and 2019. So we kind of have we separated out the results and also have a combined one so that we can take feedback such as this to say, okay, now that we know this about, municipal court specifically, we can take that into account when we're looking at that vehicle. But maybe for most of the other departments, maybe it makes sense to look at the average over the 3 years if there wasn't much of a change. So we kind of have those separate data sets so that we can take that feedback and insight, from those who know what the vehicles are actually doing, so that we can say, okay, given that, we've got the data we need and we can either expand it or focus it as needed based on that insight.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate hearing how closely you're looking at, especially given the oddity of the past year. Thank you. And Mayor Patterson, thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Grace. I just want to mention to council that Clean Fuels Ohio and Power Clean Future Ohio have been very good to the city of Athens. It doesn't hurt that every time they roll out a program that we jump on them right away. As I understand that the EV analysis was a first come, first serve. And when I saw the announcement come out, I knew that there's the value that this would have for the city to take this kind of an analysis, a deeper dive into what we could be doing in the future, as well as other programs like the equity coaching, which we also applied for, which is another great program to see where the city can be doing a better job, where sustainability and equity interact with each other. So we'll be working through that as well. So I did want to share those things with council. The other thing that's worth mentioning with the productive idling, and that is that we were a little bit surprised. I think we assumed that it was going to be the police department where we're going to see some of those vehicles having the larger amount or larger percentage of productive idling, when in fact it was engineering and public works, because a lot of our service trucks, when they're out there, especially in the dead of winter, jumping into a hole in the ground with a water line break, that truck does need to be idling so they have a safe and warm place while they are repairing our water system or sewer system, whatever the case may be. But all the same, the 10 miles per gallon rate, you're correct. I mean, it's because of the slow driving in the city. We don't take them long distance drives anywhere, especially not during the pandemic. We didn't. So last year might even see an increase in idle times. But then again, maybe not, because we weren't doing a whole lot in 2020. So again, thank you from me to you, Andrew and Brandon, for being with us tonight and presenting the data. And we look forward to seeing what the rest of the data looks like when you're done crunching numbers.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. And yes, as the mayor said, I look forward to following reports, and we appreciate knowing what's happening and being informed at this point and anticipating the final analysis and recommendations.
And thank you for everything you're doing to make not only Athens, but other communities around the state of Ohio greener and to use cleaner fuel. It's really wonderful that you're providing these analyses for free.
Well, with that, I believe our committee will move on to the next item on the agenda. Did you have anything else, Mr. Chicky?
No, I do want to mention that, the next steps, while we've got this initial information, the next step for the city is to stand up these committees and start putting our heads together and soliciting feedback on the initial information that we've gotten. And that includes department heads and labor supervisors and people that really are on the ground with how they use their fleet and how they use the vehicles to get work done. What we want to do is provide value for them, provide efficiency for them, and not hamstring them by providing something that they're not going to be able to use effectively in the field. So it's a collaboration. It really is. And this is something that's been ongoing for a while. I do want to mention, we've had the Green Fleet previously, early on with the adoption. So this is something that is a continuance of those early initiatives. It really is building on that foundation.
Thank you. Next up is the wastewater remote site telemetry improvements. This is project number 339. And this is the telemetry equipment that monitors our 20 remote wastewater sites. Is currently old equipment that we are unable to get replacement parts for anymore and things like that. This is critical equipment because it monitors the function of the pumps, the flow rate, and immediately sends that information to our EPW. And so they have requested that we authorize the service safety director to purchase the new equipment, and that would be $540,000 for this telemetry site for the 20 remote wastewater locations. And there is money available. I believe I'm speaking with Jessica Adine, the director of EPW, today, and she said that because of the critical nature of this equipment, they would really like to move forward with this purchase. It's with new equipment, then all of the sites would have the same equipment, and we'd be able to adequately and properly monitor these different remote sites. And that is mostly the information that I have, but I will attempt to answer questions or will contact Jessica Adine if I don't have the answers. Member Hall?
I'd like to point out once again how our workers are so good at being able to jury rig and make these systems continue on, even if they have a hard time getting parts and tools and things. And I think that is a real testament to their work for the city. And I really appreciate that they go above and beyond. So thank you.
And Jessica Adine did mention today that with new monitoring equipment, then the any reports of any malfunction then are very promptly received, and repairs can be made before things become bigger problems. So I saw Member Reisner.
Yes. Out of what fund lines is the money coming from?
750.637, the sewer wastewater, I believe, is the fund line.
And what's the balance there now?
I am sorry, I don't know that. But
I just bring it up because that $500,000 is a good chunk out of a fund line, and I don't want to see the fund line so depleted that if something came up, and some emergency or other would occur that we needed the funding, that it would put us in a bad place.
Well, when I spoke with our engineering director today, she did mention that this was something that we have used some of the 0% loans for the engineering design, and had, I believe, considered seeking further loan funding for this, but because there are local dollars available, believe that was the direction, but mentioned that it is possible that the auditor and our service safety director might decide that we should go with the loan for this project.
I see.
Would you like to comment, auditor? Thank you.
Sure. I actually talked to Jessica last week about this, and there's actually 3 parts to this, but there is one part that really needs to move forward now. The other 2 areas, and I'm sure Sarah, knows this too, won't really be ready with the plans until August. Those will be, we will take advantage of the 0% loans for the ones in the fall. But right now, council's in the process of moving $250,000 back into the sewer fund from the sewer debt fund that was moved into there for a project last year. And so the money is there for her to do at least this part of it, which, and I'm sorry I didn't look up anything before tonight, but I think this portion of it is around 300,000, a little over, and then the rest of it will be done in August, and we will take out loans. But there is money there for what they need to move forward with right now.
Thank you for that, Auditor Heck. The only dollar amount that I had was the 540 that I believe is for the full thing.
You're right. Yeah.
Mayor Patterson, did you have some additional information on this?
I do. I mean, just looking at the March report, unencumbered balance is $847,437.12. So as Auditor Hecht indicated, the money is there.
Okay.
At least for this first portion, and then we'll do the low interest loan as we move forward with the other 2 portions of this project.
Are there any other comments or questions? And thank you for that clarification, Mayor and Auditor. Seeing none at this time, that concludes City and Safety Services. Thank you, President Nisley.
And thank you, Councilmember Grace. We'll now move on to Finance and Personnel Committee. This is chaired by Councilmember Crowell and joined by Councilmembers Reisner and Smedley.
Thank you, President Isley. We have a number of items on our agenda tonight. The first are vacant positions. The city administration has brought forward some vacant positions for council to review. I'll briefly describe these, and then I see that we have HR Director Lucas on the call, so we can turn it over to him if we have any additional questions. The vacant positions include a code inspector. I think this is sorely needed in order to keep code up to, let them catch up and keep them up to date. This is to replace a retired employee. There is a request for 2 custodians. These would be external hires. There is a request for a EPW project assistant to replace an employee who is departing from that position. There is a request for a maintenance technician for the streets department. That also would be an external hire. And then the city has also requested that we start the process of hiring a water treatment plant manager. I know that the mayor and the service safety director support these. And we have Mr. Lucas here if he wants to add anything or take any questions. Council, any questions for me or Director Lucas? Yes, Member Smedley.
Thank you, Member Crowell. So I'm assuming all of these are existing positions that are just not filled currently, and we're okay.
That's correct.
That, and I assume these have all been determined to be essential positions that we need right now. And I see nods from the mayor, and I assumed as much, but I figured we would just clarify that. Thank you.
These are critical positions. You know, we've been extremely frugal with individuals who have left the city or have retired and not filling those. But at this point in time, we do need to start filling some of these, the critical, they're all critical. But also please make note of the water treatment plant manager. We need to have a manager in place down there. We have coverage, but we need to move on these. And again, these are already budgeted for within the staffing ordinance. So none of these are new positions. These are existing positions that we have held off as long as we felt we could as a cost savings measure under COVID-19.
Thank you, Mayor. Good questions, Member Smedley. Seeing no other questions, thank you, Director Lucas, and we'll move on to staffing. We will need to amend the staffing ordinance for 2021, 014120. And that is necessary for the environmental coordinator position. That employee will be paid 25% out of the sewer, sanitary sewer, the wastewater treatment plant, 750.637, 25% out of the water fund, the water treatment plant, 740.630.637, and 50% out of the sewer stormwater fund, 755.637. And there's currently no payroll balance in the fund line for the stormwater, 755.637. As you'll all remember, the environmental coordinator is a new position that we've already approved for the city. So we will have to be bringing forward an ordinance to cover those necessary expenses out of that 755.637. And I will note that the auditor's office has requested this information by the week of May 17th. So we will need a suspension on the second reading in order to provide this in a timely manner to the auditor's office. Are there any questions about the amendment of the staffing ordinance? Seeing none, we will move on to the next item, which is appropriations and transfers. And we have, as usual, a number of items here. Excuse me. We'd like to appropriate $11,000 to the Athens Enhancement Fund. 1,000 of this total will be for the microgrants program, roughly $250 for each ward or each neighborhood, or neighborhood projects, I should say, and then $10,000 for the Art Outside the Box program. So that's $11,000 to the Athens Enhancement Fund. Yes, Member Smedley.
Thanks, Member Crowell. No question, just a comment. Just glad to see the micro grant program going through. So thanks for getting that going, Mayor.
Thank you. And the next item is we will be appropriating $29,191.96 to the CARES Act Fund so that we can transfer that remaining balance to the general fund for public safety payroll. So this was an amount that was not used, and now we can put it back in the CARES Act fund to go to the general fund to use for public safety payroll. And the next item is our payment for the sewer debt fund. And this is appropriating $289,000 to 750.636, transaction code 600. This is to pay our debt on the for the sewer, sanitary sewer plant. And then we need, as mentioned, about the staffing, the previous item on our agenda, the staffing ordinance, amending that. We need to appropriate $35,000 to the Stormwater Fund. Again, that's 755.637 for that payroll associated with the environmental coordinator position. And moving on to my last item under appropriations, the city and has a municipal separate storm sewer system permit called an MS4 permit. And as part of that permit, the city works with the Athens Soil and Water Conservation District, and the Soil and Water Conservation District works with the university because the city and the university have a combined stormwater management plan, and the Soil and Water Conservation District does a lot of education and outreach. They do a river sweep, they do rain barrel workshops and rain garden workshops, and we would like to appropriate $4,000 to the Stormwater Fund, so that the Athens Soil and Water Conservation District can continue their public education and outreach, which, as I mentioned, is a part of our permit. It's part of our stormwater plan. So that's the last item to be appropriated. Are there any questions about that item or any others? Yes, Member Clodfelder.
I'm just curious if it is possible to have kind of a summary figure at this point about how much of the CARES funding the city still has remaining.
I don't have any of that off the top of my head, but Auditor Hecht, maybe.
There, I got you. This CARES money is from last year. This is some that was left over that wasn't used that we had appropriated for this grant. We didn't quite need all of it. And so that money has to be moved out of that CARES Act fund account line. And we can't really spend it this year anyway. So the Service Safety Director will have to update our spreadsheet that we turn over to the county, that they turn into, the state, et cetera, to account for our funds.
Okay.
So we can't just leave it sitting there. We can't do anything with it now, and it's just sitting there.
Okay, thank you for that information. And I'm just curious, is that the last remaining pool of CARES money? Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, it is. Under the CARES Act, that's it.
Okay. Yes, Mayor Patterson.
I just want to mention, going back to the micro grants, I'd be remiss not to recognize Councilmember Chris Fall, who worked very hard on the guidelines for those neighborhood grants. And so it's great. It was put on pause due to the coronavirus. We were ready to roll at the end of 2019, and we just didn't get there. So it's great that program, it will be going out again, and soon to be encouraging people to apply for up to $250 for a neighborhood project of some type, beautification project. So thank you, Councilmember Fall.
Yes, thank you, Member Fall. Thank you for that, Mayor. I'll also mention that the Art Outside the Box, which is the artwork that we have put on our switching units, the large silver boxes at most of our intersections, is also a terrific program. And we have local artists who submit designs, and they're certainly eye-catching, and everybody has their favorites. Anyway, I'm very supportive of that program. Okay, yes, President Isley.
Thank you. And I do believe that Art Outside the Box was also, we have the Municipal Arts Commission to thank that's been involved in the design work and reviewing all of that too. So just an aside.
Yes, thank you. Okay, moving on to the last item for finance and personnel tonight, the county sewer line extension loan payment. We're pleased to report that the auditor has reported that the county has provided partial payment for the sewer line tap fees that will be part of that county sewer extension. The city has a fairly low interest loan with Hocking Valley Bank that we are recommending. The auditor and the city administration is recommending that we pay off. It was, I believe, originally a $288,000 loan at 1.67% interest. And I'm not actually sure if that was the original loan or if that's what's remaining. But the auditor's office and the city administration is recommending going ahead and paying off that full loan because we did get this payment from the county and we can do so. And there always will be another a need for another Hocking Valley Bank loan in the future. So if we can get this one off, get it off the books, we will be in a good position. So that's the recommendation from the mayor's office and the auditor's office. And again, that's a partial payment, and we should have more money coming from the county in the future from those capacity fees, those tap fees. Are there any questions, or does the mayor auditor want to provide any additional information? Okay, well, thank you very much. That ends finance and personnel, President Isley.
Thank you, Councilmember Crowell. We'll move on to Planning and Development Committee. It's chaired by Councilmember Fall and joined by Councilmembers Reisner, Grace, and Smedley.
Great, thank you. Just one agenda item, and thank you for getting the micro grant up and running again. I appreciate it. Thank you. Which is a title, a right-of-way license for the University of Ohio on Factory Street, 7 Factory Street. They would like to put a transit stop. Has been okayed by all city departments and signed off. So, thank you. Questions? Okay, great. Thank you. That's the end of my, oh, wait.
I did have one question about that. And maybe this is self-evident, but I just wanted to know for sure, would this be for an Athens municipal bus transit stop, or?
This is the city, the Bobcat bus. Is that what they call it?
Okay.
So they have a plan. The recommendations from the plan are attached to the application, and they would like to refigure some of the stops and stuff. So thank you. Any other questions? Great, thank you. That's the end of my committee for this evening.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Fall. We'll now move on to the Transportation Committee, and Councilmember Clodfelter is chairing this, joined by Councilmembers Crowell and Ziff.
Thank you, President Isley. Tonight, we're going to be talking about grant proposals. The Engineering and Public Works department is gearing up for 3 big grant applications, and they need us as City Council to kind of approve their ability to apply for these grants. One is a Transportation Improvement District grant that they're hoping to get. If so, they would get a maximum of $250,000 that would be used to offset the overall costs of the Stimson Avenue construction project. And so they really want to do that to lower the cost for the city and the taxpayers for that. Then there's another one that would be for the Ohio Public Works grant application program. They tried to get one of these last year and were not awarded. It's very competitive. However, they're going to go again for it. It provides a maximum of $400,000 And the goal for this year's application would be to improve lighting and make some other infrastructure and safety improvements to the west side neighborhood of Athens. Again, it's competitive. There's not a guarantee. They tried it with the same goal last year, but they're going to try again, and they think they have figured out ways, they being, I got this information from City Engineer and Director of Public Works, Jessica Adine. They have figured out some changes to make that they hope will further strengthen their application for this year's competition. That is due in early September, so we've got time on that one. But the third one, we will have to deal with more quickly. It is a small cities program application. These can be big applications. This could be a 7-figure kind of award if they got it. They haven't, they being, again, the Department of Public Works and the Engineering Department, they haven't decided for certain what to apply for this year. They're finalizing their discussions about, what to make the goal. But the deadline to apply is June 15th. Excuse me, June 15th. So we will have to suspend the rules on this one in order to give them permission to apply for that competition before we begin our June recess. So for the others, we've got time. For that one, we will need to speed things up. Any questions from committee members? Sam or Ben? Or from other members of council? Or from members of the city administration? Any from the public? Okay. All right. That concludes the business of the Transportation Committee for this evening's meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember Clodfelter. Well, now we have one item under Committee of the Whole, and this is proposed by the Ohio Municipal League and also with recommendations from Auditor Hecht and also our tax administrator, Tina Timberman, that we consider passing a resolution that would oppose this substitute House Bill 157. And briefly, what this House Bill 157 is currently in the Ohio House Ways and Means Committee. And what it would do is repeal Section 29 of House Bill 197. The significance for the city is that that Section 29 of House Bill 197, which is currently in effect, allows the employer withholding and liability for the employee to be taxable for the city where the principal place of work is located. And so this has been an extremely important tool for the different municipalities in Ohio, us included, during the COVID when people have been working in remote settings. And so if this House Bill 157 would go through, it would repeal that. And the effects would be what Tina termed as possibly chaotic for businesses and municipalities throughout the state. The Municipal League has provided us with a sample resolution, which we have available. And our taxpayer administrator's comment is that she always thinks it's helpful to add something, that personalizes our particular resolution. And her recommendation is to make the legislators aware that taxpayers who filed last year have already taken the credit for those taxes. And so that's just going to add further confusion for businesses and also for municipalities. Auditor Hecht, do you have any comments? I know you're more fully aware than I am of the circumstances about this and the consequences.
You did an excellent job explaining that. I do want to add one thing, unless I missed that you said it. Changing that is people should know, if you just look around and think about the majority of people that work in the city don't live in the city limits, but because they work here, they do pay income taxes and to the city. And so one of the biggest and most confusing part is that they want to make this retroactive to January of 2020, which means all of those people who started working from home last March through all of last year, who've all filed their taxes and just done everything else, would have to be issued refunds for last year and through this year. We're almost halfway through this year. So it's pretty chaotic. And as far as the employers, issues for them are, a single business, such as the city, you might say, but even anything smaller, has employees working from different areas in the county. And so we do have taxable entities within the county and people who might live out. I have someone in my office that lives in Morgan County. Then the employer has to withhold for those employees to those places that are taxing entities. So it gets really complicated and much more difficult. Rather than withholding for all of their employees to the city of Athens, it would just be, it'll be a nightmare for the city to correct that, but even more so for small businesses, I would imagine. And yeah, a lot of adjustments on tax returns that have been filed. A lot of people have already filed this year even. So it's going to happen, but the way they're doing it is just making it more of a hardship, and that would be a lot of money refunded from the city's coffers if this passes, as is. Thank you.
And it looks like we have questions from Councilmember Falls and Councilmember Smedley.
It seems that it's another issue of home rule that we've been talking a lot about. It also sounds sneakingly like they want to make this particular thing permanent forever, which would decimate our ability to have income taxes, and that is a majority of our funding. So we're more at risk than some of the other communities that are larger, but this could be potentially catastrophic in the amount of money that we potentially could lose and have very difficult time making up. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Smedley.
Thank you, President Nisley. Member Fall touched on my question. How much does the city stand to lose if something like this were to be approved? Do we know?
Well, that's really hard to project. We don't know exactly who is working from home, who is working at their job site. We have a fair number of people from the city who are still working from home. People in my office went home, came back part-time, went home again, and stuff like that. So it will be really difficult for people to try to track that over the past year. And so because of that, we have no way of knowing, there are people working from home who maybe go in to their work site once a week and things like that. And so we figure at least $200,000, which is a lot for us.
Mm-hmm. When you figure that these are all good questions and comments, and when you figure that the university many of the employees there were working remote this past year, and that's our community's largest employer. And the other comment that Councilmember Fall made about, our income tax. And like most of the other municipalities in Ohio, that income tax is an incredible amount of money for us. This is just a ballpark that I keep in my figure that I keep in my head, and Auditor Heck can correct me if I'm wrong. But for our general revenue fund, I think close to 80% of our general revenue fund is from income tax. And then 80% of that money then goes out to our salary and fringe for our city employees. So when you begin to affect something like that, it really is consequential. So with council members' consensus, we could move on to a resolution. And I see that Mayor Patterson has a comment. Yes, please.
I do. Just real quick, this is a pretty serious issue that the Ohio Mayors Alliance is certainly digging into. I think the comment was about bigger cities maybe not being as impacted as one like ours. It's if you stop and think about cities like Cincinnati or Dayton, where there's a lot of employees that come over from Kentucky, you are a border city. And so that, and likely individuals coming from, again, taxing municipalities. It's in my conversations with the mayor of Dayton and the mayor of Cincinnati in particular, they stand to lose significant amounts of revenue with something like this. So I really encourage and will applaud council to move this resolution forward. I think it's needed. I think you're going to see a lot of cities across the state of Ohio that are also going to be doing something similar, and know that at the OML meetings, or the OMA meetings rather, Ohio Mayor's Alliance, that I'm certain this is a conversation that we're all having and that we're having with our legislators to make them wake up and understand what the true impact of something like this would do to cities of all sizes and villages.
Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Eisen. I just wanted to say that I'm in full support of this resolution opposing Substitute House Bill 157. I would note that the Ways and Means Committee decided, I think last week, not to take a vote on this. And so I'm hoping that there is a little bit of momentum in our direction, or a little bit of time anyway, to really put some more pressure on. So I'm all for this resolution. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay. If no other comments or questions, we'll consider ourselves adjourned for the evening. It's 8:07 p.m. and our next council meeting will be a regular session held on May 3rd.